If I ask you to hum the theme of Black Mage, what would you choose? Black magic in Final Fantasy is mainly used to convey elemental destruction, so a strong aggressive theme usually fits best. But in Final Fantasy IX, Nobuo Uematsu had to score something different. He had to score a weapon of war that was afraid of its own existence. Today, we are wandering into the depths of this theme. We're going to deconstruct Vivi's theme instrument by instrument to understand how Uematsu translated the Japanese concept of Aishou, a specific kind of sorrow and pain, into one of the most beloved tracks in gaming history. Hello, I'm Emiliano Giaquinta and this is the first episode of a series of deep dives into the music of Final Fantasy IX. Let's take a look. Before we look at the notes, we have to look at the prompt. As I discuss in my book, A Book to Call Home, every main character in Final Fantasy IX was assigned a specific virtue or keyword by Hironobu Sakaguchi. For Vivi, that word was sorrow. Let's break this down section by section, starting with the introduction, of course. This is where Uematsu establishes Vivi's shell, the timid, hesitant way he moves through the world. Now, the first series of pitches, we are looking here at the violin, viola, violoncello and contrabass part, which is basically the beginning of the theme. They play a series of pitches, alternating dyads between the cello and the contrabass against the viola and the violin. We have an A and an E playing against A sharp and D sharp, and then we play D and G against again A sharp and D sharp. Now, if we were to play this on a piano with close voicings, the sound would be incredibly dramatic, but also dissonant. Let me play this for you. It would sound something like this. Very, very, very dissonant, very dramatic. But the orchestration hides this dissonance, first by spacing the voicings out, but mainly through the usage of pizzicato. Let's take a look, let's hear. So pizzicato creates a short plucked sound. It's not a confident, sustained bow stroke. It's tentative. The fast decay of the sound makes the chromaticism feel less harsh and more like a step, simulating Vivi's tentative footstep in Alexandria. Notice the interaction between the low strings and the high strings. The cello and the bass are playing on the downbeat, but the violin and the viola answer back on the upbeat. It creates a hiccup effect. It's a musical hint about Vivi's character. He's a child that means no evil. Now, as a last look on this introduction, you can really observe that none of the instruments by themselves could define the theme. It's the string section themselves playing that creates this beautiful sound. If we were to listen just the violin alone, it's hard to even recognize the song. Now, let's move to the next part. When the section A starts, the melodies play in combination by the violin and the viola. The violin plays the first half of the melodic line, while the viola concludes it. This technique is called dovetailing. In general, it's used for instruments that require breathing over fast passages, like woodwinds, when a flute might play a part, very fast part, and then the clarinet would complement it, or another musician playing also the flute. But here it's used smartly to change the color of the phrase on the go. So I'm referring to this section. Let's take a listen. Now, if we were to listen only the violin, and the viola, Now, if you're asking yourself, like, I never heard this on the soundtrack, a way of identifying the different concept and the different instruments in the original soundtrack is trying to pay attention to the panning of the instruments. You will hear the violin playing on one side and the viola on the other side. And as we play the game, you really don't notice that there's actually two instruments playing this melody, but it's actually how it was programmed by the team. Also, as you can notice, the bass foundation now plays on the upbeat, and the downbeat is reinforced by a bass drum. Speaking of drums, we get also a hi-hat alternating between closed and open positions, adding rhythmic movement to the section. Let's take a look at that. It's very simple, but it's part of the soundtrack we hear. And together, it sounds something like this. Okay, cool. The section A actually concludes with a bridge bringing lots of different colors. Let's hear this. If you pay attention, it's carried by a clarinet and a bassoon duo. Why these instruments? Because they have a warm, rounded, woody sound. They sound organic and harmless. It is well known also that woodwinds match pizzicato strings perfectly, creating that magical vibe. The very last phrase is also augmented by a trio of horns, creating a dramatic finish, bringing us to a sudden stop. Now the sudden stop here, it's actually used as a bridge to the next section, which is section B. Let's listen to some of these components in isolation. First, the clarinet. Next, only the bassoon. Now, let's listen to the second part, the bassoon. Okay, sounds cool, but really what brings everything up is the horns supporting this finale. And so the section A slowly moves to the section B. Before moving to section B, let's think again about Vivi's virtue. In the English translation, it's sorrow, but the Japanese word used, Aishou, implies something deeper. It is composed of kanji meaning pity and wound. This is the core conflict of the music. How do you write a theme for a character who is walking around with a deep existential wound, but who is also just a timid, innocent child? Uematsu's solution was brilliant. He didn't write a funeral dirge, he wrote a childish waltz. Let's take a look at Doriko and see how he built this timid yet seeking answers personality from the rhythm up. For the section B, let's hear a bit of it. So the bass drum and the hi-hat disappear. We are left with just a triangle gently marking the time. It is delicate, fragile, and over this, a flute enters to trade phrases with a clarinet. This shift in orchestration actually changes the storytelling perspective. We are no longer watching Vivi trip over his feet. We are hearing his internal thoughts. The woodwinds are supported by the string section, still playing pizzicato. It's the most playful, let's say, of these three sections. We can take a look at the components. First, the flute. And if we hear then the supporting side of the strings, and lastly, the flute is answered back by the clarinet. The woodwinds are breathy and intimate. The conversation between the instruments is quiet and conversational. This represents Vivi's inquisitive nature. He isn't just timid, he is a curious kid. He's constantly asking, why? Who am I? This section is the sound that represents that innocent curiosity. As the section B ends, we are greeted by a bit more of percussion. The percussion we hear here is basically the bass drum returning, hand claps, and also the timpani. That also marks the end of the flute playing the lead and brings back the brass section. Now, when we get to section C through this percussion fill, which, by the way, this is a signal that the emotional climax is coming, right? The orchestration changes completely to tell us something new about Vivi. For a moment, strings and woodwinds stop completely, and we get that bronze sound. A trumpet and French horns enter on top of it, on top of a timpani and a bass drum, and pay special attention to how effective the supporting horns are in combination with the trumpet's short lead. Now, if we hear the trumpet, in combination with the horns, let's hear first the horns. It's kind of eclectic, the sound of the horns. Let's take a look at the notation actually. It's kind of signaling danger. Now if you hear all of them together, it's a very short passage, but for me it speaks a lot about what's to come on section C, which has like 3 or 4 different musical sounds and characteristics. We can observe then that the hi-hat returns together with a triangle, we have a finger snap, we have a cowbell, and all that combines with the sound of the bassoon taking the lead. And this last part of the section is when we go to the climax of the piece. This is no longer the timid child. This is the black mage. This is power dormant inside him. The music swells with determination. It tells us that despite his fear on the section A and his playfulness over the section B, Vivi possesses a profound noble strength. He's brave. Bravery and perhaps peril is showcased by the snare drum, the bass drum, and the timpani. The lead is taken by a clarinet, and then it's supported by the horns. Now, it's one of my favorite sections, not just of the song, but of the, I would say, Final Fantasy IX soundtrack. It sounds so powerful compared to what was preceding this part. Let's break it up. First, the strings are not there. The horns add support. I really like the sound here of the horns. They add this part of bravery and also a bit of peril to the overall sound, together with the percussion, of course. But of course, the main part of this section is the clarinet taking the lead. We're talking about a JRPG from PlayStation 1, right? So we're expecting the music to loop. And already on the soundtrack, we have the ending part that loops us back to the beginning. And the beginning, as you remember, it's made out of the strings. So the looping part is this. which is simple yet effective. We have all the other instruments that were playing sustained notes, and then the strings get to play a little bridge section back to the origin. Overall, it really feels like it's a simple piece, but it's so profound. If you think about the 3 arcs it builds, the timid black mage, then the more introspective one and playful, and then the brave and strong one. Now the game confirms this shift in tone later on. When we finally arrive to the Black Mage village, we hear a remix of Vivi's theme, but notice that the changes are there in the orchestration to show us that something is different. The organic, timid woodwinds are gone. They are replaced by piercing synth leads. The warm acoustic bass is replaced by a synth bass. And also we hear a synth marimba panning hard left and right. Why? You could think of it as Vivi realizing he's artificial. He meets his family and they are dolls. The music reflects this emptiness. It's the same melody, the same soul, but the warmth that has been there now is stripped away, replaced by the cold reality of his creation. It takes Vivi's personal sorrow and transforms it into the shared synthetic reality of the village. Now, there's a specific part of this soundtrack that in the end for me is painful. So why it hurts? Because Vivi's theme tricks us into loving the mask. We fall in love with the hesitant hat-adjusting kid in Alexandria. We laugh at the cowbell and the bumbling walk. But by the end of the game, when we realize that Vivi has stopped, that his clock has run out, we realize that this happy song was actually a tragedy the whole time. It was the sound of an innocent soul trying to enjoy a world he wasn't meant to be in for very long. This is why, in my opinion, Uematsu is a master. He didn't score the Black Mage, he scored the child inside the robe. Scoring for games or movies requires us to discover what's behind the mask, and even sometimes tell the audience way in advance something that they will not know through the plot. And I think that's why this composition is so special. It really went into telling the whole arc of Vivi, and we get to listen to that at the very beginning of the game. So, thank you for watching. If you like the video, subscribe. This is gonna be the first of many videos on analyzing the music of Final Fantasy IX. So probably next one's gonna be about Steiner and how Uematsu composed the keyword dilemma to reflect his character on the music. That's pretty much it, and see you next time.